what has escaped not only our our society. We've lost all ability. I think all cognitive ability, unless you're one of a few um, in the world that you have the ability to think for yourself. You have the ability to think and reflect about your viewpoints, about how you do react to conversation, and that's the one big thing that I try to teach my students within colleges. And I try to, when I do speaking engagements and we talk about critical thinking and the lack thereof of critical thinking, that what's the overall issue with the lack of critical thinking. And it's like, well, we don't teach individuals how to think anymore. People just, I mean, really digest and ingest the mass amounts of snippets of information that come to them through social media. I mean, whether it's on any of these platforms, and they don't want, they'll just hear the same thing over and over. And it's not just the lack of critical thinking skills. Now it's the lack of logic. Um, and logic is very, very different than critical thinking. This is why reading philosophy and understanding the community of inquiry that philosophers have built over a millennia, that when we go all the way back to Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, and we look at, everything from Descartes, and we get up into the 20th century, I mean, we can go through the Stoics and the Cynics and all the different schools of philosophical thought. They all say kind of the same thing, or at least within a mantra of the same thing, which is, it's about you, how you process information. And that is where I'm going to tell you, a vast majority of our society is just stupid. I mean, I say it, right? It's not trying to be all high and mighty. I'm not trying to be all high and mighty, but when you look at, well, do you want to become an intellectual? Whether someone was, well, you're a pseudo intellectual. Well, we're always learning. We should be always learning, and that's the problem, is people don't want to learn, right? How much do you actually pick up a book during the day? When was the last time, and I asked this of a lot of colleagues, and when was the last time you actually say that you studied philosophy in order to teach yourself, in order to really understand the community of inquiry, asking questions? And I got to say, most people will say, no, they haven't, they won't. And they find philosophy boring. It's like, well, but you're not really looking at philosophy. You're not wanting to make yourself better. So when we talk about the decline of critical thinking within our society, one just has to look at the United States. We are so polarized, and you listen to the arguments, and the word argument actually is based in ignorance. You should always have discussions and debates. When was the last time you could sit down and have a talk? Again, people don't understand. We've lost this ability over the last 100 years. Here in the United States, we don't teach philosophy within our school systems, because what? At the turn of the century, Andrew Carnegie, he wanted, because of the Industrial Revolution, we have to train individuals to be workers, not thinkers. And that was the reason that you have our education system of hours and recess, and it's conditioning us as workers that you're just going to finish school, and then between this 8 and 3 with these breaks, and then you're going to move on to going into an assembly line, and that's exactly what the conditioning was. But then we lost the ability to have logic. I got to say, really, in the last 2 to 3 decades, we as humans, as Americans, let's just talk about Americans, and this is the complaint from Europeans, that, well, you Americans think one way, and it is true. We think that we're so free and we can say what we want to say, but that's not what the meaning is. It's we no longer have the logic. You know, you have to think about, when we're talking about logic, and that's kind of the quick one I'm going to go over here in the next 3 to 5 minutes. 3 things that I think you can really sharpen your own logic towards critical thinking is really understanding that you have to separate claims from reasons. When someone makes a claim, that is not a reason. And so once you really start to understand that, I think you will come a long way in understanding that a claim is what someone wants you to believe. How many times do we mistake that claim? And there's times that when an individual really is meaning, here's my claim, but they're also making that claim as a reason why. So whereas a reason really is a support offered for that claim. So you have a claim and then you have the supporting evidence, right? We no longer want that evidence. We think that the claim should speak for itself. When you talk about like the anti-MAGA, the people on the left versus the right, a lot of them make one main claim and then say that is the reason offered to support that claim. And so when we talk about, say, this policy is going to reduce crime, that's a claim that this policy that we're creating is going to reduce crime. Cities that adopt a similar policy saw crime fell over the last 3 years is a reason for that claim, right? So once you can identify the difference between the arguments to evaluate the information, what's a claim, what's a statement, you're really going to really start to understand your own framing of information. So you have to stop reacting only to a tone or the confidence level that somebody puts behind it, or even the popularity of a statement. Because if we don't, if we don't really start to hone ourselves or capture ourselves before we start to take off, we're the only ones that are going to break that chain of events. So you have to start asking, what exactly is being claimed? And then what's the evidence for it? Not against it, or it's what is that claim being made? And then what's the evidence for that claim, that someone would want to make that claim? All too often in this politically, polarized and as, of course, politicized arena that we live in of political theater. And that's the way I look at it. I just had a discussion with a colleague the other night that I am neither would call myself a Republican or, the two-party system here. I'm like, okay, I have conservative values. I have Christian values. But I also have compassion and empathy. But I have to look at things for what they are at face value, mind you, in order to start to look at it from a logical standpoint. So the second lesson I want you to think about is that the testing the connection between the reason and the conclusion. Because if we don't, then what happens? Because a reason may be true, but still fail to really prove the point to support that claim, in support of that claim. So say, here's the example. So say someone says, this person is successful, so all of their advice must be good. Like, okay, take what I'm saying at what my background, 35 years doing, intelligence work and thinking critically and evaluating information that may be not full. It may have been misleading. It might be, misinformation, disinformation. It might have even been propaganda given to me. But because I am one to quickly go, okay, I'm not going to draw a conclusion from that claim or from the reasons of that claim to say that it's true. So the first part must be true, that if we're saying the person is successful. But the conclusion doesn't always automatically follow. Logic teaches us to examine the bridge between evidence and conclusion, right? Does the evidence really support the claim? Are there other explanations? Is the conclusion too strong for the evidence to be provided? Or this habit that you have to create is sound reasoning. All too often, people do not form a habit. You've already heard it, right? The mantra of, if you want to change your ways, change a way of thinking, change a way of maybe a diet or anger management, do something routinely for 21 days, 3 weeks, to change that habit. It's not a trait. We're not born with the trait to think logically. We're not born with the trait to think critically. What we are is that we have habits, and we formulate those habits. And you've heard good or bad habits. Well, if you have a bad habit of, someone says something and you spout right off, well, then guess what? Your bad habit is that you would spout right off rather than saying, very interesting. Do I really believe what you're saying? Give me time to take that claim, take your supporting evidence, and let me do my own research. I hear what you're saying. They shouldn't be upset. If they're going to be upset and say, well, you need to make up your mind right now, or you've already made up your mind. No, I haven't. You're a rational, intellectual individual when you come off that way. So the third lesson is that you look for any hidden assumptions. And that's where I was going with that. The hidden assumptions is that every argument is going to depend on the ideas that may not be stated directly. So when someone argues, we should use this new software because it's faster than everything else, or it's better than everything else. They are assuming that speed matters, or that it's just better. And so it moves more than the cost, or say the security of that software. They rush that, or even the training time, or even the accuracy, right? When we get into the AI stuff and we say AI, Claude is better than ChatGPT, or Copilot is better than Claude. And, it's like, well, someone makes a claim, but what's the evidence supporting it? Can we break that down? What is it best at over something else? So logic is really going to help us bring those assumptions into that open. You want to bring assumptions into the open. If they live in the dark, then you are just as culpable in allowing someone to continue the fallacy of the argument. But then, so once assumptions are visible, they can be tested. And that's the thing. You want to test it. You want to ask more questions. Some will hold up. Others will collapse. It will then divulge itself. So learning logic, and this is really, really want you to take this away, is learning logic begins with that simple shift. Don't only ask whether you agree with an argument. Don't let someone ask you that. You are your own self. You are one that can say, you know what? Let me hold on that. And then ask how the argument works. What's the conclusion that you want to get to? What reasons support it? Again, you're asking these questions to draw it out from the dark. Do those reasons actually lead there? So what assumptions are hiding underneath? Depending on the individual asking or talking or arguing, they have their agenda. They have their own assumptions. And as you ask these questions, you're shining light, and they're going to tell you who exactly they are. And then this is why you can apply the logic, actual logic. So these questions don't make thinking slower forever. You'll get better. Again, it's a habit. So as you get drawn into conversations and you spark conversations, with practice, they're going to make your thinking sharper. And that's exactly what I'm here for. So whether I'm on Substack or I'm on my Medium, I really want people to understand how to think sharper. Logic becomes less like a school subject and really more like a mental toolkit you can draw from during certain types of discussions and debates. These are very, very useful in actual conversations, decision making, reading, writing, analysis. Your everyday judgment is highly affected by really taking in that self reflection, reading and understanding other perspectives and viewpoints. That's why I think reading books, period, not listening to them. I'm actually take up a physical copy of a book, and it doesn't matter what. The goal really is not to become impossible to persuade, right? It's not that you want to be that brick wall. You're saying the goal is really to become persuaded by better reasons. That if you really want me to see that this policy is right, that you say it's right, then you should be able to have that conversation with me. So that's the reason I just wanted to pop on for a couple of minutes. I really appreciate you looking and reviewing, and I will do others of these here soon. You all take care.